All right, welcome back to the Picking Your Brain podcast, where we interview people doing ministry at a high level. And on today's episode, we have the legendary Chris Trent. What's
That's
up,
funny.
Chris?
I think you just called me old. Is that what you just did?
No, just legend, man, legend. No, I was explaining to you before we push record that, man, I grew up as a student pastor,
Yeah.
21, 22, 23, just listening to your podcast, Youth Ministry for the Longer Haul.
Yeah.
And if you're a student pastor, you still can probably go get some nuggets of wisdom from that. It was so good.
Those were good. I did that for, I forget, 60 or so episodes with Jody Livingston. I jumped on around episode 50, and Jody's still doing that podcast. And
Wow.
and we had a great time, and we kind of broke up like the Beatles, but no, we didn't. Actually, we're still great friends and talk all the time, but both of our circumstances changed. But yeah, man, those were a lot of fun getting to do those and interview folks. So yeah, man.
And so I'm sure you've heard stories over the years of all the people maybe you've impacted through that, but just a guy in Louisiana was just getting to learn from you.
How about that?
I loved it. And
that was
so
our target. Our target audience was Louisiana. That's good that
you reached at least one. So anyway, I'm just so excited that you're willing to give up some time to be on here. And so for anybody that may not know you, Chris, will you just explain where you're serving and kind of just let people know what God has you doing right now?
Yeah. So, man, I'm a youth pastor at heart. I've worked with teenagers, honestly, since I was one. I'm a product of youth ministry. Into my junior year, a youth pastor reached out to me. I was unchurched. Parents had divorced in middle school. He invited me to youth camp. I didn't even know what that was. I said yes, met Jesus that week. Then looked at my youth pastor. My calling wasn't very spiritual in the sense that I just looked at him and was like, I want to do what you do. And God used that. And so I ended up at University of Mobile and did that, met Wendy there. And we spent some time then in Texas after we graduated doing seminary. And for the last 20 years, we've been in Marietta, Georgia. I served 17 years at Johnson Ferry Baptist. And I was both the middle school pastor there for years and the student pastor towards the end of all of that. And then a little over 3 years ago, started working for the Georgia Baptist Mission Board. My title is Next Gen Catalyst, which isn't a great title because it doesn't make much sense. But really, I direct Next Gen Ministries in the state, which involves both children's ministries and youth ministries. I live in youth ministry for the most part, though, and I kind of stay out of the kids ministry folks' way, and just let them do what they do really well. So, man, now I spend my days. We're empty nesters. And we travel a lot of Georgia and are speaking at different things. She and I does parenting things together. I'll preach on a Sunday. I'll preach at a D now. I'll do breakout trainings, but I also spend a ton of my time. The thing I love most is the networking that I get to do with youth pastors in the state, where we're just doing lots of mentoring and helping each other out and trying to, because we really, it's kind of one of those, we're better together. I know that people say that, and it's, kind of like saying we need balance. Everybody's like, oh yeah, we need balance. But I really do believe we're better together. And if I could connect the dots with youth pastors in the state, in which we've been doing successfully, I think it makes a huge difference. So yeah, that's what I spend my days doing now, man.
Awesome.
Well, and I'll plug my podcast, by the way.
Oh, please. Yes.
Yeah. Which is, we just finished episode 41, but we do the youth ministry podcast for volunteers. And I co-host that with Jennifer Fletcher, who's a former girls ministry associate of mine. And it's strictly for volunteers, though. So if you're listening and you're looking for a great resource to, hand to your volunteers, we keep them short and we do little simple topics like how to get that kid to be quiet in your group that talks too much and how to take prayer requests without them taking too long. So yeah, thanks for the plug. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it.
Man.
Well, the format of this podcast is going to be super simple. I'm just going to ask you a few questions about you as a minister and how you think about ministry and the different ways that we can learn from you today.
Awesome.
Does that sound all right?
I love it.
Well, the first question I will start with is, what is one of the biggest shifts in student ministry that you have maybe seen over the last several years, probably coming out of COVID or those things? And then what is one thing that you've seen that's kind of the core, that stays the same, that we all should focus on? So what would you say for those?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm blessed to I do this talk called Current Trends, and I've been all over Georgia doing this Current Trends talk. And one of the main things that I key in on is some statistical stuff that has come out of Springtide Institute, which is a great research company. They do some really amazing things. Now, full disclosure, they're researching kids that have a leaning towards church or involved in church,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not all necessarily Christian churches. They also will, or at least like in our Baptisty world, they might be a little outside the box a little bit there. But that said, they're
Okay.
all kids that have some type of faith. Okay. So one of the things they came up with and they began to learn was they coined this phrase relational authority. And
Mm-hmm.
so one thing that I feel like has shifted in a major way is relational authority is simply this. Kids don't really, um, they're not going to give you authority in their lives when it comes to the things you're trying to teach them or disciple them with, unless you've taken the time to build a relationship. Now, our tendency in this moment might be to think, well, it's been like that forever. But the facts are, but something's changed. It's a little bit different now because in days gone by, like a teacher, a coach, a youth pastor, a pastor, a student might trust what they have to say just because they're people that are in authority positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that said, though, here's where the tweak has come. Now, what they're discovering and what a lot of people are affirming as I've talked with this is that if you've not built that relationship, they may show up to your thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're allowing you to speak directly into,
Yeah.
from authoritative standpoint. Now here's what's amazing, Blake. Like literally, coaches throughout. I've had 3 coaches talk to me about this, and they've literally said, "Chris, you have no idea. Used to, I could say to a football player, run through the brick wall, and because I was the coach, they'd run through the brick wall.
Yeah.
But something's changed. If I don't take the time to build relational equity with them, I can't get them motivated." Well,
Yeah.
friends, that's a little bit different. That means that here's where it gets a little bit. This is where our sensitivity meters start to kick in. This might be a little bit of an indictment on the Wednesday night church model. If your Wednesday night church model is worship, do a game, big message, that's youth group, right? Now, what I'm not saying is that's a bad idea. What I
Yeah.
am saying, though, is if there's not adults pouring into those students in a 1 on 3, 4, 5, maybe 8 or 10 kind of way, you know what I'm saying? Like in a small
Mm-hmm.
group setting where there's intentional discipleship and relationship building going on, odds are that kid may come for 6, 7 years of your youth ministry, and it may not move the needle much with them spiritually. They may like church, they may come, they love youth group or whatever, but they may not necessarily be getting a ton out of that.
Yeah. No.
That's a
And
lot right
so,
there. Big bomb drop, just dropping
and,
bombs. Yeah.
no, it's good. And that conclave, it's so funny you brought that specific thing up because that conclave, you were one of the few breakouts that I went to.
Yeah.
And
What were we
that
doing the other
specific,
time? Were you skipping? Like, what
well,
are we
no,
talking about here?
that made it sound like I only went to a few. I went to a bunch of them. You were one of
Okay,
the,
okay.
you were one of the,
I
yeah.
skip conclave breakouts all the time and go out to eat, but I'm just being transparent with you. Yeah, yeah.
I sat in your current trends one, and
Yeah.
that specific thing I
Yep.
taught at my church the next
Good.
Sunday at my leader training.
Yes.
I thought that was so good. And just because you're a life group leader does not mean you've earned the right to be able to speak into that student's life. You've
And it's
got to be present. Yeah, yeah.
It's got to be more than, and this is what we have to tell our Sunday school teachers or our Bible study teachers. You've got to be more than just, I'm really good at teaching a good lesson.
Yeah.
Because they're getting talked to and they're getting content all the time. So that's where that relationship stuff is huge. Now, so I think that's a pretty major shift in youth ministry. And I think youth ministries are going to have to continue to pay attention to that. But in a sense, though, that I don't know that relationship, you asked a 2-part question there a minute ago.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that hasn't changed also in a sense, though, that relationships still matter. They've mattered in the past. I think there's more on the line now with that.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I would even more so relationships matter because their relationships outside of the church or even everywhere because of social media is so shallow.
Very much so.
They hear so much information and to distinguish what's true, what matters, what do I really need to impart in my life. They're going to really base it on who really cares about me, and then I'll listen to them. And so for us as student pastors and leaders, I completely agree. That's so good.
Well, they're way more savvy than we realize too, right? And I think this is one of the reasons why another stat that came out was, this generation is more connected than any other generation in the history of anything, right? But they're also the loneliest generation on record. And that doesn't even make sense. They're more connected, but they're the loneliest generation. And when you let that simmer for a minute, it's like, something's off there, you know? Well,
Yeah.
then if you add that relational component into that, yeah, they may be connected, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're relationally connected on a deeper level, you know? And so if I'm leading a youth group right now, that's one of the things I'm leaning into heavy is how can I help my volunteers to do a great job at that? How can we
Yeah.
figure out ways to build great relationships so that, by the way, remembering that we're not going to compete with TikTok.
Yeah.
Like whatever game you come up with is not going to ultimately compete with TikTok. But what you can provide a student or a teenager with is you can provide them something they're not getting anywhere else, and that's relationships.
Yeah.
Adults genuinely caring about them and pouring into their lives.
Yeah. Because those connections you were talking about are all superficial.
Sure.
They're all
Oh yeah.
surface level,
Totally.
and so that's where, and we'll transition to question two,
Yeah.
kind of is what we're
Yeah,
talking
totally.
about. So my question was, how do you recommend to recruit and retain small group leaders in student ministry? And so I know that goes right into what your podcast is all about. But yeah, so
Yeah.
as a student pastor on a Sunday morning, I'm looking at my congregation. How do you identify? Okay, I need to get these people. I need to recruit them. But then once you have them, how do you keep them in your system to
Yeah, that's
continue
great.
teaching?
And we could do a whole podcast just on this topic alone when it
Yeah.
comes to, and honestly, I think the older you get, the better you get at this. And that's not a rip on younger folks that, I mean, they're
Yeah.
great, but the older I got better at this, I felt like, and, um, a few things that pop into my mind though, when it comes to recruiting. One is I think we have to remember that it's kind of a full-time job for us that we need to always be on the lookout for potential volunteers.
Hmm.
Now, if I rewound it just a tiny bit here, here's what I would say. Number one is make sure that if you are flying solo or you're wearing that as a badge of honor, that I can't get anybody to volunteer. It's just me and my wife, or it's just me, my wife, and that one other couple or whatever. I
Hmm.
would respectfully, I would argue with you, then you've not tried hard enough. That there's
Hmm.
somebody in your church, if you start praying and seeking, that would be willing to step up. And sometimes we don't want to give away that authority. Sometimes we want to, own that ourselves. Like I said,
Hmm.
kind of as a badge of honor or whatever. That said, um, I think one of the things that was helpful to me is I was constantly, being a cheerleader for youth ministry and for teenagers in my congregation. And I was looking outside the box. I also wasn't just always looking at the young couples or even the couples only
Hmm.
with kids in the youth group, but I was also looking at senior adults or empty nesters that have a little bit extra time on their hands.
Hmm.
And this is where like attending that chili supper might be a really good thing, and not just sitting with the people you always sit with, but rather sitting with others. I played softball, men's softball, um, for a little while, and I ended up recruiting like half the team before the year was out. Because why? Because I built great relationships with those guys,
Yeah.
and them and their wives. They wanted to serve in my ministry. So I think that's a big help. I do think part of that also, though, if you're going to, work at recruiting, if this is a challenge for, listener, whoever you are, wherever you are,
Hmm.
I think you need to make sure that you're able to clearly articulate what your youth ministry is all about. And that's
Hmm.
sort of that vision, that core value type of thing. But if you're going to ask somebody to give up their time, you need to make sure that you're clear on what you're actually asking them to
Hmm.
do. And friends, it needs to be more. It needs to be more than, well, we just need some extra, bodies adult bodies in the room on Wednesday night. No, you need to
Hmm.
think very clearly on what are you asking them to do. And then I think the other part of that is you got to make sure you're training them, right? You got
Yeah.
to make sure that you're equipping them with what they need to know to do the job that they need to know. Remembering this, that most of us in youth ministry, we intuitively know how to walk into a room full of teenagers and hang out and we're just fine.
Hmm.
And it doesn't bother, man. If you're in youth ministry, like you feed off of that, right? Some of your volunteers don't think that way. They walk into a room full of adults and they don't necessarily, room full of teenagers, and they don't necessarily know, what to do there. So again, I think that's where it's important to make sure they're fully aware of what you're asking them to do, equip them, and then just be an encouragement. I've said this before, and I love saying this in front of children's ministry people, just to make them mad. But I kind of have an attitude of unapologetically, the best place to work in the church is in youth ministry,
Yeah.
and I just try to create that culture. Remember that
Hmm.
they're probably not going to Sunday school, so you need to be a
Yeah.
little bit of a shepherd to them as well.
Yeah.
And just again, It doesn't happen overnight, but if you can build that culture, what's going to happen is you're going to find out that there are adults wanting to serve because there's a rep. Because these same adults that are loving and being fed in your youth ministry, they're going to be out to eat with another couple or whatever that's struggling in their Sunday school class because it's boring, they're not doing anything or whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
and all of a sudden you're going to have people going, "Hey, I'd like to serve in that. How can I get involved?" Or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah, and something that Scott Sullivan, who works with you at the
yeah,
Georgia
Sully,
building, he always told me when you're recruiting people, like it's intimidating when you go up to somebody and tell them we want you to come teach life group because they
right?
hear I got a monologue for 45, 50 minutes. I can't do that. I can't teach.
Yes,
And so he broke it down, which what I now my model is. I tell people is that, hey, do you love teenagers? Do you want to see
yes,
them fall in love with Jesus? If you do, I can teach you how to teach. I can teach you how to recruit, or love on them throughout the week. I can teach you what to do when you go to a ball game. I can teach you all of those things. So
yes,
that just kind of
yeah,
you just see weight just kind of go off their shoulders,
yeah,
like,
totally,
okay. And
yeah,
so there's tools out there. If you're a young student pastor listening and thinking, how am I going to equip, an adult to do
yeah.
this? I mean, your podcast
And
is
that's one of the
one
reasons
down.
why we started the youth ministry
Yeah,
podcast for volunteers, honestly. I mean, so that would be
absolutely.
a resource.
And,
But yeah, you're
so
right.
I would say yours, and then download youth ministry.
That's
And
great.
just not.
Yeah.
I mean, they have the download youth ministry university that you can
Yep.
literally walk your students through the
Sure.
training. There's all kinds of resources out there. So don't not train people because you don't feel like you can do it. There's
Agreed. Yeah.
resources that you can have that can help you.
Yeah. Hey,
Um,
another little bonus idea here for you, by the way, Blake, would
yeah,
be
yeah.
this. When you're given the opportunity, celebrate youth ministry and the things that are happening, not
Mm-hmm.
just on Wednesday night or Sunday morning in youth group, but from the stage as well. So like
Yeah.
when you get back from camp, that you're hopefully maybe your pastor will allow you to celebrate what God, when you
Mm-hmm.
have a D now, that you can celebrate and also use inclusive language there that
Mm-hmm.
not the youth group, but the church. We look what's happened in our church with our teenagers, what God has done. Again, that creates that culture and that momentum where a lot of times, honestly, some people they end up going, I want to be a part of that. Like I want to be
Mm-hmm.
involved in that. Why would I want to change diapers in bed baby world? Like, I'm sorry. Listen, there's some preschool person listening right now hates me. Like, listen, it matters. Okay, it matters. That's just not my gifting. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
so you're gonna get an email. So yeah, it's awesome.
So no, I would just to add one more thing on that
Yeah,
is like in my leader meetings, I try to be intentional to celebrate when someone's doing really well.
yes,
Someone's
yeah,
hit
man.
every ball game or
Come
they've
on.
reached out. And so because there's old saying is celebrate what you want to duplicate.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
if you're just hammering out
Yep.
saying, "Hey, man, Mr. Lewis, thank
Yep.
you so much for planning that trip to Buffalo Wild Wings, and you ate the hottest wing, and the boys haven't stopped talking
I
about
haven't
it."
stopped talking about it. Yeah, totally, man. Totally. Yeah,
So
there's no doubt about it.
celebrate amongst your leaders and even the church
Yeah.
things that are going well,
And
and
these
it'll duplicate.
keep coming to my mind. I think I've got actually
Yeah,
a
yeah.
breakout idea on this. But another idea is, man, make sure you're doing the basics. And I probably should have started there.
Oh,
But when
yeah.
you're trying to create that culture with your small group leaders, at a minimum, like you've got in your calendar multiple times a year where you're going to maybe gift them with a candy bar and a note or something.
Yeah.
But also at a minimum, make sure you've got all of their birthdays in your calendar with an alert. And the day
Mhm.
that you text them or reach out to them or send an audio message or something to everybody that volunteers, that's part of that shepherding thing. And
Yeah.
also paying attention to those moments like that one small group leader's dad that you have's dad is going through cancer, that you're being a shepherd in that moment. Even if your
Yeah.
pastor is involved in that, but that you're involved. Again, all those things matter, man. I could go on, like I said, we could do a whole podcast just on this topic. But yeah, man, that's good. Thanks for asking those. Those are good.
Yeah. And we'll keep moving along. We'll go towards families. And so,
Okay.
I was at lunch today with a student pastor, and we both talked about, and this is not really my question, so I'm sorry, but I thought it was really good.
No, it's
At
good.
lunch, we were talking about we all, as student pastors, should or do have a heart to equip, parents to be the disciple
Yes,
makers of their own. So, but
totally.
today, as at lunch, as he was saying that, I was like, man, I agree, but I would say families today aren't even aware that's their duty.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so I was just as we were sitting there, I'm like, yes, and my question is going to be how do we equip families? But maybe you take a step back and how do we make parents even aware that's
Yeah.
their duty. That's what God's called them to do, because we're spinning all of our wheels trying to say, oh, here's how we equip them. Here's how we equip them. Most of them
Yeah.
don't even realize God hasn't called you to drop your kids off at church.
Sure.
That's not the training. That's not the equipping. God has called you to be the ones, and we come alongside you. So maybe
That's all.
one, how would you make parents aware that that's their
Yeah.
job? And then what are some practical ways we can equip families?
Well, I think one thing would be to just begin to pray for your church and pray for your pastor and understand that that really needs to be a complete culture shift for your overall
Mm-hmm.
congregation and your overall church when it comes to parents being discipled as well. So that's part of it. If that becomes part of the DNA from the pastor down, from the pulpit on
Mm-hmm.
Sunday mornings, that's going to help, a ton. I think the other thing would be, you may be super busy. You may not have time to go all in on some type of parent ministry, but at a minimum, make sure that you're communicating well with parents, that you're being encouragement to parents, and that you are, casting that vision. And maybe that's even as simple as on Monday, an email goes out that says, "Hey, awesome Sunday yesterday. Here's what we talked about. If you want to have this conversation, to be candid, and this is not very popular, what I'm about to say, what I don't think this is coming up with a resource and giving them all a book they can do around the dinner table.
Yeah.
I think that's an incredible oversimplification of what it means to disciple your kids.
Yeah.
And so I think authenticity is going to win the day in this. And so what you have to strive for is you have to strive to have parents that are authentically walking with Jesus, but they're allowing that authentic walk with Jesus to impact their entire family and everything that goes on with that.
Mm-hmm.
Wendy and I, we put together, we found ourselves, God sort of dropped this in our lap unexpectedly, but we find ourselves now doing parenting conference things throughout the state. And I do a
Mm-hmm.
tech talk, and we do something together. And when we were writing our first one, we landed on this title called Staying Connected in an Overly Connected World. And it a
Mm-hmm.
little bit comes from that stat I shared earlier about the loneliest generation. Part of that does, but I think you're right. Like I don't know that parents realize that things are rough right now
Yeah.
with teenage world, and I think part of that is that they are incredibly connected to their teenagers. They're
Mm-hmm.
constantly texting them, "What time are you going to pick me up? And don't forget, we got to be at this, and then I'll pick you up here, and we're going to do this right there." And we're riding from point A to point B together, and we're together. We're together. We're together. We're all together. Everybody's together. Like I'm over
Yeah.
exaggerating that, right?
Yeah.
But what I don't know that everybody realizes, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are together.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the new Willy Wonka. There's chocolate, and there's chocolate, and only a handful of awesome people are going to understand what I just said. But listen, there's a difference between together and together, and I
Mm-hmm.
think I think part of that, man, is like just getting to a place where uh, parents understand that, man, they've got to be intentional about turning off those disruptions and
Mm-hmm.
connecting spiritually. And I do think as a leader, though, that's where, as a youth pastor and youth minister or youth leader in your church, that's where you've got to be willing to pull that curtain back and not be defensive about the idea that parents would want to know what you're doing, but rather
Mm-hmm.
you're open-handed with that. And just be like, "Hey, here's what we're talking about, man. You want to pop in on a Wednesday night? You can pop in on a Wednesday night anytime you want,
Yeah.
and check out what we're doing. I love that, man. Just jump in, And I think overall that might help move that needle just a little bit.
Yeah.
That and get to know
Absolutely.
parents, by the way. Like, and
Yeah.
be truthful about that. Like, if you kind of have a tendency to not like parents and be the youth pastor that's always complaining about parents, maybe
Mm-hmm.
change your heart and attitude a little bit on that. Because let me tell you, first of all, I
Yeah.
think they know.
Good.
And especially if you fall into that category and you're young and you don't have kids yet, that's also, again, just candidly, I will tell you that once you have kids, it really does change your mindset on a whole lot of stuff. I felt like I needed to go back and apologize to a whole bunch of parents, once
Yeah.
I had my own. But yeah, man, I think all of those things, if you can get to know parents, that's going to be super helpful as well.
And Chris, I know you have a background of middle school ministry, and
Yeah.
so I'm the middle school pastor at our church, and so I think middle school ministry helps us have to dial in even more because middle schoolers aren't coming to church unless parents are bought in.
Correct.
More
Very
than
much so.
likely. I mean, and so, man, just we spend so much time trying to make everything fun and make it fun for the kid to want to be there. But if the parents see that it's vital to be in student ministry, they're going to have them there. And so, as a young
Totally.
student pastor, you have to have the parents bought in. You have to show that you're a professional,
Yep.
that you're not just
Yes.
some kid doing something, but you're like, hey, we have a plan, we have a purpose for everything that we do. Overly communicate, like you said, because parents in this world, and as my kids get older and
Yeah,
we're in the
totally.
school system and we're at dance and we're at all kinds of stuff, no one communicates well at
Yes.
all. It's like
Yeah,
we don't know when stuff is, when it
totally.
starts. So if the church can set apart and be like, hey, I'm going to communicate with you super well, if you can just do all of these
Totally.
things well,
Yes.
and then you have a parent meeting to try to equip them, they're going to be far more likely to want to come listen to what you have to say.
Well, and I'll take that a step further, Blake. And even if you have
Yeah.
that parent meeting and you're frustrated because only half the people showed up, that you don't punish them for not showing up, but rather you make that information available to them on the back end,
Yeah,
of that as
absolutely.
well. And you don't get worked up about that, be like, well, you should have been at the parent meeting. I shared all that information. No, just make it aware. Maybe even record it and send it to them,
Yeah.
and again, you have to be realistic about the type of parents we're actually working with, today.
Yeah.
And I think, that's, I think that's a lot of it right there, So yeah. And I'll give you another just pro tip here, man. Like,
Yeah. Please.
it helps you to know, parents, if you stay organized, and track with me for a second here, see if this makes sense, Blake. But
Mm-hmm.
on Wednesday nights or Sunday mornings, or right before you're leaving on that big trip, if you're running around at the last minute, putting out fires and getting permission forms and getting the words and pro presenter, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you're tied up working, doing that. But what that doesn't allow you to do is to leverage that incredibly intentional 20 minutes time leading up to the time your thing starts, where
Mm-hmm.
you can talk to people. And I got to a point, man, listen, like, I'm not too good to load luggage on the back of a van or under a bus
Yeah.
for camp, but I don't do that. And not because, again, I'm too good, but because I'm walking around talking to, and I don't do registration either, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, I find volunteers to do those things so that
Yeah.
I can walk around, shake parents' hands, encourage them, and it just makes a huge difference in the end.
It does. Absolutely. Well, speaking of preparation, this will be a good one.
Let's go.
So, the summer for me is kind of a time as I start thinking through my next year of like
Yeah.
preaching calendar. What do I want to talk about? And so, amongst my group of student pastor friends, I've kind of asked them because we're at graduation time now in May. And so
Yeah.
I've been at this church for almost 9 years. And so the kids that are graduating, we had them in middle school, seen them through high school. And so as they're walking across the stage, I was thinking, what are the 7 things that like we need students to know? What do we want
Yes.
students to know as they go through our ministry? And so as I'm
Yeah.
thinking through my calendar year for preaching, I wanted to ask you, and I put 5 on my question, but what are 5 topics or things that you think foundationally that
Yeah.
students need to know to be well-rounded in their faith?
Yeah. I think that's great. And I don't know that I'm going to have 5 specific topics
Yeah,
for you,
that's
but
fine. Yeah,
I
yeah,
could
yeah.
speak to this generally, though, in a way of saying, I mean, I could pull up my old scope and sequence, that we did at
Yeah.
Johnson Ferry while I was serving there. And if anybody wants that, you could reach out to me and get that. You could probably find me through Blake's show note page or something there. But
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think the key is that you understand that you have a kid, whether you're doing middle school ministry only, or like a lot of folks listening, you're doing youth ministry in its entirety, and
Yeah.
you've got a kid for 7 years. Um, there are going to be some things where you have to duplicate that topic. I think it's a little idealistic to think that you're going to, year one, talk about, identity by doing a study in Genesis.
Yeah.
And those 7th graders are going to remember that their 9th grade year when they really need it, so there are going
Yeah.
to be some topics that are big, like biblical sexuality and all things tied to that we're going through,
Mm-hmm.
that you're probably going to have to touch base on every other year or so, at least.
Yeah.
I think the key is, though, and you can find lots of these examples online, understand language like scope and sequence
Mm-hmm.
so that you can figure, and you can Google that and look up what that means. But basically, that is, what is your plan for the next 3 to 7 years or whatever,
Yeah.
where you are intentionally saying, these are the things I'm going to talk about on Wednesday night and cover on Wednesday
Mm-hmm.
night. And then if you can sit down and carve out a day to do that sermon planning all at once long term, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to make sure that you're not duplicating things all the time.
Yeah.
But I think also it allows you to, I was real intentional. Like, I would do like how-to topics. I would do book studies. I would do character studies
Mm-hmm.
about David, or
Yeah.
Paul or something. And then you could do doctrinal type things, as well. And making sure that you're not literally just, because all of us probably have a leaning that every month I'm just doing how to,
Hmm.
or rather every once in a while I'm doing a character study and letting the biblical text speak for itself.
Yeah.
And again, I think if you could just sit down and do that planning, what you're going to learn about yourself and learn about your tendencies. And that also, though, that also means you need to be planning on how are you going to be evangelistic with all of that.
Yes.
When,
Yeah.
because I think we get caught up, man, we got church kids and these church kids and the church kids. And sometimes I think when you're in the same youth group for a long time, you forget that maybe you need to do an invitation. Maybe you need to share the gospel,
Yeah.
and it doesn't necessarily fit into your how to survive school, series or whatever, so I think that helps with all that. But again, I think there are a lot of samples out there, that you could look
Yeah.
at. And yeah, I think it's great, man. And a lot of times if
Yeah.
you're using a curriculum like on Sunday mornings, they already have a scope and sequence anyway. They've got
Hmm.
something. But you're talking about that Wednesday night maybe or Sunday night planning
Yeah.
when you're doing your message. I think that's where that comes in super helpful. But I think biblical sexuality though is huge.
Yeah.
Gospel understanding is huge. I think you got to keep going back to that. I think uh, a spiritual discipline type. What does it mean to be a disciple of the Lord? How do you walk
Hmm.
with the Lord? Very how to, the quiet times, the prayer life, all of those type of things. I think
Yeah.
that's a big thing that needs to be covered, on a regular basis as well. But yeah, that's a few that come to my mind.
All right. And we'll transition to the last question here. And this has been a hot topic question for probably the last year or two, but
Yeah.
we're seeing a shortage of student pastors right now,
Yeah.
just across the country, really. And so, first of all, why do you think that is? And then, second of all, what can churches or even student pastors do to help call out the next
Yeah.
generation to follow into the student ministry thing that we both love?
Yeah, I've been a part of a lot of conversations as we've, wrestled with this question, doing what I do now with Georgia Baptist
Hmm.
and knowing other state guys that do what I do. And honestly, even having conversations with guys like, Shane Pruitt and Scott Pace, who wrote Calling Out the Called.
Hmm.
A lot of people are thinking about this. I think a few highlights that I would say is one, we there was a moment there 10 plus years ago where we started putting this major emphasis on everybody's called to do ministry. Everybody's called to do ministry. And while biblically, I get what they mean by that in the sense that
Hmm.
we all are called to the Great Commission. Doesn't matter if you're working for a church or not. We're all called to serve the Lord. I
Yeah.
understand why that matters, but in that, I think there was a little bit of a almost a downplaying of people that though are uniquely called, if you will,
Yeah.
into some type of full time or bivocational type service. And as a
Okay.
result of that, I think we lost some traction there, with that. I think also the COVID, actually really culled out a lot of stuff as well and revealed a lot of our
Hmm.
problems, and there's a lot of people that left, which left a big opening there. I think schooling also became a problem. And
Yeah.
and I've been blessed to have some conversations even with some of the seminary and college professors about this as well. As school transitioned from the old model in ministry of you go to college, you get married, you move off to seminary, you go to seminary, and then you start your church, right? That people just don't do that now. I mean, a
Yeah.
few people do that, but most people don't do it that way anymore. Most people are going to college, finding a job in a church, and then they go to seminary part time, and they do
Yeah.
like online. I think as a result of that, though, it has impacted just numerically the folks that are, going and prepared for that. But I'll tell you this thing. Here's the other part, man. Like somewhere along the line, we forgot the basic idea of simply discipling somebody that's feeling called to ministry and showing them the ropes and taking them under our
Hmm.
wings and pointing them to how they can get there. And I'm blessed. We do a thing in Georgia. Once a month, I meet with a group of called students from literally all over the state that have been to one of our events, either our camp events or our move conference over Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's. And we always do a calling to ministry invitation. So when they do that, I invite them to come, and we just sit in on a Zoom call now. my first step is to encourage them and hold them accountable to finding a ministry mentor that they can meet with in person. Like that to me
Yeah.
is step one, right? But with that, the other thing I'm just trying to do is I'm trying to help them navigate. But I got to tell you, man, some of them are like clueless about how to get from I'm at camp, I feel called to ministry to I'm serving in a church somewhere. And so I think I mean, listen, Jim Manuel, he invited me to youth camp. I got saved. I looked at him weeks later and was like, I want to do what you do. That was sort of my calling to ministry. But he didn't take that for granted. Literally loaded me up in his car and drove me over from Crestview, Florida to Mobile, introduced me at the Bible college there, to the recruiter, showed me what I needed to do, and was showing me the ropes. As soon as I got to college, I got an internship. Mike Cook, literally taking me to the hospitals with me, with him. Like, you're coming to the hospital, so you know how to do this, and showing me the ropes. Man, I think we lost that somewhere along the way. That, and if I could be so bold as to say this publicly, which I don't know that I ever have. Oh, boy, okay, this may not be the best thing to put on. This part maybe just don't use this clip for social media.
We may blur this part.
Yeah. I'm a little bothered by how many people are in ministry and they're willing to share their knowledge, but in order to get it, you got to pay them a dime to get there. Like all of these cohorts and these sign up to be a part of my thing. Listen, I respectfully, some of these people are friends, so I don't mean this disrespectfully, but where did we switch over from, like, I'm just going to bring you into under my umbrella and I'm going to disciple you and show you how to do this thing. You need help? I got you. Now, to be fair to some of those guys, I'm blessed. It's kind of my job to do that. Right. So it's easy for me to sit here on this podcast and say that, but there's something there though, that feels off to me. I will teach you how to do that. I'll teach you how to be a great youth pastor if you'll join my cohort for $1,000, or whatever. And I mean, don't get me wrong. If anybody wants to pay me $1,000 to jump on a Zoom call with them and teach them, I'll do it. But that said, I'll also do it for free. Like anybody. Like, I mean, let's just jump in there and do it. Again, it's my job. But I mean, I think there's something off there, and I hope we figure that out at some point. Is that bad? Am I in trouble, Blake?
No,
like for saying that?
No,
what do you think?
I know. I think that's good. I think.
Yeah. Do you have a cohort that you're charging people to be a part of? I hope not. Hope I didn't step on you.
I don't think anybody wants to hear what I have to say. But so the thing though, I think that maybe the core of that is there's not older guys that are reaching out to younger guys saying, I want to mentor you.
Yes.
And then there's not younger guys reaching up to older guys saying, hey, can I be mentored? I feel like there's just a chasm there.
There's something awkward. There's something off there. And that's what we got. Yeah.
I'm 31, so I'm not old, but in student ministry terms, I have 11, 12 years of student ministry experience. I have stuff that I can offer.
Yes.
A 21, 22-year-old.
Totally you do. Yes.
But how do I call up a guy and be like, hey, bro, I want to mentor you? Like, that's awkward. I can't do that.
Yes.
And then if the reverse is true, when I was 24, 25, I looked up to guys and I wanted to be mentored by them. But how do you just hop on a phone call and call them? So, like, how do we bridge that chasm there?
So that's in Georgia and honestly a lot of other states, because I know these guys, they're passionate about this as well. This is why we're trying to get back to the relational part of this thing and go, how can we build networks that don't exist only so that we can do a big area wide D now together, but that we're actually supporting one another, encouraging one another, so that hopefully when those moments you're sitting on a call with somebody, a Zoom call, like virtual networks are so easy now, bro. Like, it's such a great resource, but then you see a guy and you go, hey man, like, I would love if you would be willing to take me. Can I just tell you, I'm not going to say the name, but this is currently happening in my life. Like, I promise I'm not embellishing what I'm about to tell you. 3 weeks ago, I'm on the phone call with, if I said the guy's name out loud, some people would know who he is. He's close to 70 years old, still doing youth ministry, cultural type stuff. And I was blessed to get to know him in a way. All I did, I called him and said, listen, you don't have to say yes to this. I know you're busy. But as I've gotten older, I'm 53 years old, I find it harder to find people that will mentor me and pour into my life. Would you be willing to set up a meeting once a month over Zoom with me and just let me pick your brain and you challenge me on things that you think I need to be thinking of to stay relevant, right?
Yeah.
So part of that, man, if you're a young listener, I think, Blake, you've tapped into something super important here. Be willing to stick your neck out there and ask somebody to do it. And if you're an older listener, just throw it and don't get your feelings hurt if nobody takes you up on it, right? But just be willing to say when you're at that network meeting, hey, man, if you ever want somebody to grab lunch with you, man, I got you, man. And maybe try, if you can afford it, you know, maybe try to cover their lunch. That might help.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. No, those are just, things that are going through my
passion,
head right
man. I got
now.
all giddy about it, man.
But yeah, no, that's just, I think we all want to grow, but we just don't know how to do that. And so, like you said, this last week, I just kind of scoured the internet of guys that are doing middle school ministry really well. Because I've been in middle school ministry for a long time. And I just wanted, so there's 2 or 3 guys that I reached out to that I'm going to hopefully can build a relationship with.
Let's
and be able
Why
to
not?
grow.
Yeah.
And so it just, anyway. Yeah.
And most guys will say yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Except the ones that are doing, you know, cohorts that you have to pay money to be a part of, you know. So,
yeah, and then just if they
move on.
If they say no, you don't want to be mentored by them anyway.
This is what I'm saying. That's exactly right. Right? Yeah. But you find a guy who's like, I love that, man. But I will tell you this, Blake, and maybe if you listen, that was an answer to prayer a few weeks ago. I realized that there was a little bit of a void in my life, and I've done this multiple times over the years. And I said, God, I feel like I'm disconnected right now, and I need somebody to be poured into me a little bit, a mentor of some type. Please provide somebody for me. And it just, I think God answered that prayer, man. So I think that might be for somebody listening as well. Starting point, if you feel like you're doing this on an island, be willing to reach out to somebody and say, hey, you know, and Blake and I'll help you. Come on, let's just do this thing, man. We'll start a whole new.
You can help them, and I'll help them.
Let's do this thing. Let's do this.
So you can help them, and I'll send them to your podcast.
Whatever, boy. You're doing a great job. You're killing it, man. This is good.
Well, anyway, Chris, man, thank you so much for giving us some time and going through a wide range of topics on student ministry. And I'll probably have to have you back on, because we can talk about a bunch more.
Yeah, that's great.
Just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, and listen, if anybody wants to find my contact stuff, youthministry.info is my link tree, which is kind of like my website. If you like youthministry.info, and it's got my contact right there. Listen, if you scroll down just a little bit, it's got a link to the podcast and other stuff and other resources as well. All of it's just free stuff or whatever, you know. And dude, youthministry.info, I only bought that like a few months ago. It was just out there. Nobody was using it. I was like, I'll buy that. So, youthministry.info, and I'm happy to connect with anybody, you know, and come alongside you. So, yeah, man.
And people say that, you mean that. And
bro. It feeds my soul. Let's do this.
Because the people that have listened to multiple episodes on here, you're one of the 4 guys that I reached out to, and you may not remember this, but it was 4 or 5 months ago. I just was at a place where I need to reach out to guys that are doing ministry at a higher level than me. I just need to do it. And you're one of the 4 guys. I just messaged you out of the blue. You were so kind. So, and just, you gave up an hour to talk to me on the phone, and you helped me so much. So Chris isn't just saying reach out. He really is.
Let's do this thing. Let's talk. Come on, let's hang out. Yeah.
So anyway, again, thank you so much. And if you're listening to this podcast for the very first time, make sure you subscribe. We're everywhere you can get podcasts. There's episodes just like this that bringing in experts